Hey guys, recently I was on the Inside Scoop with Neil Crawford. That is a youth soccer podcast. And I came on to talk about the cost of youth soccer in this country. And while we've done episodes like this before, people are still missing the boat on why soccer costs are so high in the United States. So let's go. So every so often you'll see this where somebody will cause a big commotion and will be talking about the costs of youth soccer in the United States.
And you were quoted as saying you were spending $10,000 to $12,000 per year per girl.
This pay-to-play system is the first thing I would look at.
It has to be said that the sport is expensive. We're talking soccer in particular here. He says very expensive.
But here in the United States, it's a suburban sport. It's white picket fence. It's a sport of, sometimes a sport of privilege.
Now, the biggest issue I have is associated with the cost of some of that.
Soccer in America right now has become a rich white kid sport.
So lots of times these clips go viral and the discussions are around the cost of youth soccer and how it's so expensive, and it doesn't really get into why it's expensive. The focus of most of these discussions are on what I call micro issues. Club costs, field costs, tournament costs, travel costs, all of these things that are important and good to have discussions on, but they don't get to the heart of the matter, is the system is set up to increase costs to families. Let me just repeat that one more time. The system, the ecosystem that we have is set up to increase the cost for parents and families. Youth clubs operate as a business. We all know this. This is true whether you're in the United States or whether you're outside internationally. So let's look at this from a business. Starting in the United States, youth clubs really only have two income streams to generate the money they need to deal with the cost to run a club. The first is parent tuition and payments. That is the biggest source of revenue and the largest portion of how they get the money they need to operate. A much smaller portion of that is in sponsorships and advertisements. So under the United States ecosystem, there are only those two ways to generate income streams for clubs. So how does it work if you had a club in another country around the world? So if you have a youth club in another part of the world, we're just gonna, for this example, say you have a youth club in Europe. Now, there are other income streams available to you because of the ecosystem that exists. So there are, parent payments, there are sponsorships and ads, and that is similar to the United States. What I'll say about that is that typically the parent payments are significantly less and the advertisements are typically more. Moreover, there are other forms of income. So firstly would be player compensation and solidarity payments. And while I'm not going to get too deep into the woods here on that, essentially what it means is you receive payment, you receive income if that player is first sold to another club, but secondly, if that player goes on to play professionally in whatever level that might be. So if you train that player for 2 years, 3 years, somewhere in their youth development, you actually get compensation for that throughout the entirety of that player's career. There's also typically in most youth clubs a first team. So there's income generated from that first team, whether that be ticket sales, whether that be concessions, whether that be kits. Income tends to come in from the first team. You're also developing players for the first team, which goes on a whole other tangent about player development incentives when it comes to the United States versus other parts of the country. And then lastly, you have membership fees. So many youth clubs, they'll be in a particular town or a city, and they'll have residents of that town or city who make a very small membership payment every single year. So regardless of whether they have a child in the club, they actually support the club for the entirety of their life. This is very different from most youth clubs in America, where once your child is out of the club, you don't continue to support that club financially. And then lastly, there are many countries that actually have government assistant programs that fund or help support youth soccer clubs. And this really, for the most part, doesn't exist in the United States. In summary, if you understand the ecosystem and how clubs are dealing with their own costs, how they have certain streams of income, and the differences between the United States and other countries in the world, this is why the cost of soccer, the cost of youth soccer in the United States is so high. Now, if you're wondering how a change in ecosystem could affect the budget of a youth sports team, UEFA released a report in 2020 that showed, on average, how youth clubs in Europe funded itself. If you look at the percentages of how youth clubs in Europe fund themselves, you can see 40% is from, it says parent club funding. That means it comes from the club. So whether that be first team, whether that be other sources of income, 40% the club pays for itself. 20% or so are from what I talked about with the solidarity payments and training compensation. Only 14% of the total budget of these clubs are paid by either membership fees or family contributions and parent payments. And again, one thing you have to remember about that is that the membership payments is often by community members, not even people with players in the club. You can see this 28% here of other. Now that consists of municipal state grants or governmental subsidies that I talked about. There's also leagues and national association grants. So for example, a national association might give money to the clubs. And then there's also a decent amount of private funding and sponsorships. The exact numbers for parent payments in terms of percentages of youth soccer clubs in the United States is a little bit harder to pin down. There's no, national report or anything, but I can certainly tell you, I imagine it's much greater than 14% of the total budget. Some estimates have it over 90%, but again, an exact number is harder to find. So if you visually extrapolate what these percentages would look like in terms of a budget for a club, let's just assume that each player for both clubs, one in the United States, one in Europe, let's say it costs them from a budget standpoint $1,000 per player. Based on the different income streams and how they're able to fund their club, you can see the European club only needs $140 per $1,000 for the parent payment or membership, whereas in the United States, they don't have any other income streams, so the vast majority of the costs get put on the parents. The overall point here, guys, is that when you talk about the cost of youth soccer, it's not a micro issue, it's the ecosystem. It's the fact that these clubs, it's not necessarily their fault that they're charging these high amounts of fees. There's a lot of costs associated with running a soccer club. And if you're only limited to certain income streams, what options do you have? It is on US Soccer and the governing bodies to create an ecosystem that decreases the cost to families. But there's no incentive to do that. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. But anyway, I hope you liked this video. I just wanted to clarify that particular point. If you have any comments, please put them in the comment section. Always enjoy that, or reach out to me personally. See you guys next video.